The government is making a push to dismantle trade barriers between provinces. Canada has inked free trade deals with more than 40 countries, but it's not always easy to do business from one province to another. The Conservatives say there's a patchwork of different trade regulations and restrictions from region to region, and it's costing Canada billions in lost opportunities and jobs. Industry Minister James Moore is travelling across the country, calling on provinces to support an overhaul of Canada's internal trade agreement. So, can the minister get the provinces on side? Would the move help or hurt local industries? Plus, another heated federal-provincial issue. What does the BC minister have to say about the government's approval of the Northern Gateway pipeline? How concerned is he about Conservative support in British Columbia? Joining me now in Regina, Industry Minister James Moore. Good to see you, Minister.
Great to be with you.
Okay, we know these trade barriers exist within Canada. It seems pretty crazy that they still exist. Give us an idea of how they are hurting the economy the most. An example, the most egregious example of this.
Oh, well, there are examples all across the country. I mean, you can't transport and sell wine across provincial barriers. You can't sell beer across provincial boundaries. Canadians can't openly compete for government procurement and government contracts from one province to another. And yet, American firms and European firms, once the Canada-Europe Free Trade Agreement are signed, they can apply and compete for government contracts all across the country. There are examples all over the place. But so your next question is, how did it get to be this way?
Yeah.
Well, after we signed and implemented FTA and NAFTA in the early 1990s, there came an agreement, the AIT, the Agreement on Internal Trade in Canada. And for the last 20 years, there has been some progress that has been made, but in recent years, it's sort of ground down to a very, very slow, steady series of non-progress, and principally, frankly, because we've had the Parti Québécois elected in the province of Quebec. We've had other provincial governments that have been intransigent, and here we are now in 2014 with Premier Couillard in Quebec and his Minister of Economic Affairs, my counterpart, Jacques Daoust, who have said clear signals publicly and to me privately that they want to move forward with a new agreement on internal trade across the country that'll benefit Quebec and Canada's economy, and all the provinces have thus far been very open across all partisan lines, by the way. It's been great to show an openness to a new agreement on free trade across Canada that will benefit Canada's economy. So
was Quebec the only holdup, or were there other provinces that were reticent, and why would they be reticent to this kind of thing?
Well, some have been over the fullness of time. I mean, I'm here in Regina, and you'll remember back a few years ago when Brad Wall was seeking his first mandate as Premier of the province of Saskatchewan. Brad Wall is one of the more conservative premiers in Canada. And back then he was opposed to Saskatchewan joining TILMA, the Trade, Investment and Labour Mobility Agreement with that was then being led by Premier Gordon Campbell in the province of Alberta. And he did so because Saskatchewan had some concerns over it, even though he was a centre-right premier. And he had some legitimate concerns from his lens. But now, of course, the New West Partnership has been stood up and it's having some progress. So sector by sector, and sometimes because of regional issues of politics and policy, there have been some hitches in having some substantive progress. But now we're at a point where we have full agreement from Newfoundland and Labrador all the way to British Columbia, all points in between, where all the provinces have clearly sent signals to us that they're prepared to have a brand new comprehensive agreement on internal trade. And I'm very happy to be leading the debate and the argument nationally about why this is an imperative for our economic growth. Okay, so you're going to sit down with them, I guess, sometime in August and try and get this hashed out. What kind of difference will it make in terms of bolstering the economy? What, will it be actual deals that can come out of this? Will we see more money flow? How will it work? Well, there's tens of billions of dollars in lost economic opportunity across the country, and there are many firms that are now looking to expand south into the United States instead of east and west across this country. And there's lost economic opportunity. I mean, just for example, the trucking industry. I mean, Canada, we're the second largest country in the world in size, 37th largest in population. So you'd think that by now we would have a pan-Canadian understanding and a pan-Canadian engaged in and agreed to standards on trucking and shipping of goods all across the country. And even on that, we don't have it because we have stupid barriers in between provinces that ought to be overcome. So we're going to sit down, myself, my counterparts this summer, and hopefully we'll get agreement. And so far, all the signs are yet to a yes answer to the question of, are you prepared to have a brand new pan-Canadian deal for internal trade within this country that has teeth and substance? It's not just rhetoric, but real substance to deliver results that all Canadians will realize in the fullness of time. Okay, because I've got you here, I'm going to switch gears to Northern Gateway, if you don't mind. The NDP leader, Tom Mulcair, says that this is going to be a big issue for BC MPs. I'm sure you know there's environmental groups targeting the 21 Conservative MPs out there on the coast. You're from BC, or you were the senior minister from BC. You're going to run again. Do you have concern about how this decision may impact you politically? Look, certainly it's an issue that has its controversies, but public opinion polling, such as it is, shows that the British Columbians are almost evenly divided on the question itself. Number one, but number two, look, if the NDP federally want to make this an issue, like they made it an issue provincially with the NDP in British Columbia, then good luck to them. British Columbians are not in favor of political parties that say no to any and all development projects. Adrian Dix tried that tactic, and he blew a 20-point lead, and Christy Clark was re-elected. So if the federal NDP are going to follow Adrian Dix's provincial NDP strategy of saying no to all projects, and that's what they've done, by the way. I mean, let's never forget this about the NDP. For them, the energy industry and the debate over it begins and ends in the ground. They don't believe that this resource should be pulled out of the ground. They don't believe in the development.
They want to ship it east, I think, is what their proposal is.
Please. They don't believe in the development of the resource. We all remember, of course, Jack Layton flying over the Athabasca region and pointing down and saying this is a resource that we shouldn't be developing this way. We know that they're against the Keystone Pipeline. They're against the Kinder Morgan project. They're against the Enbridge project. They're against Site C Dam in British Columbia. They're against the Prosper. They're against all of these projects before the NEB process is even begun, let alone finished, let alone that we've gotten independent scientific advice. And I can tell you, British Columbians, in every single time that they've been offered a clear choice to say no to political parties that are against development and economic growth, they reject them. And so too is going to be the case with the NDP.
But you know that there are people that are on side with them. I mean, there's First Nations groups that have launched court challenges, environmental groups. There are, there are people on side with them, just as there are people on side with you. So you don't think there's anything to legitimately opposing this project and saying we have concerns about putting tankers here and we have concerns about moving diluted bitumen from Alberta into BC?
Of course, it's a source of debate, which is why this process has taken its time.
Yeah.
The NEB panel was exhaustive, heard from thousands of British Columbians that had legitimate concerns about this. It's also why there are 209 conditions that have been imposed on this project, and the project has to meet those 209 conditions in order to proceed. So the focus is now on the company to realize the concerns that have been raised and to meet those 209 conditions in order for the project to go forward. And of course, it's up for the provincial government now to assess the project through their own lens and decide whether or not they think it should get the provincial permits that are necessary. But we as a federal government have an obligation, unlike Justin Trudeau and the Liberals, who pick and choose projects clearly based on polling. They say they support the Keystone project, but they don't support Enbridge. Maybe Kinder Morgan, we'll see. And the NDP are just against everything. We actually take the appropriate view of let's listen to the NEB, let's listen to an independent, thoughtful, scientific review of these projects. And sometimes we say no. We said no to the Prosperity Mine project in British Columbia that went through a very similar process, arm's length independent scientific advice. Sometimes we say yes, sometimes we say yes, of course, with conditions, as we see as the case with the Enbridge project.
It's fair to say, though, Minister Moore, that the government wants this project to happen. You want to diversify markets. You want to open a market to Asia. You've been pro-Northern Gateway from the beginning.
Well, no, we're in favor of getting world prices for Canadian commodities. We're in favor of creating Canadian jobs through world sales. But, of course, this has 209 conditions, and if those conditions aren't met, their permit in order to be able to move forward is dependent on those conditions. So there's clearly has not been a rubber stamp. This whole process, by the way, for Enbridge began back in 2002. Yeah. The federal review process began in 2010. We've had this report, and we've been examining the recommendations that came back from the NEB for some months now. So this has hardly been a quick and speedy process. This has been thorough, it's been exhaustive, it's been deliberate and based on science. And so, yes, we want to see projects move forward that are responsible with the environment, that create the added benefit, of course, of providing greater economic opportunities to Aboriginal communities that have been struggling for some time, and that meet Canada's needs to have world prices for Canadian commodities. So, if it meets those goals and it meets those public expectations of the public good, then projects should go forward. If they don't, they don't.
Do you think that the conditions will be met? I mean, BC well, the company's got a lot to do there. Do you think that it's going to happen?
Well, we'll see. I mean, it's still a long way, by the way, from here till there.
Sure.
Even if everything happens in a fully uninterrupted timeline, as the proponents hope that it happens, first shovel doesn't go into the ground until 2018, if memory serves. So this is still a lot. There's still a lot of work to be done for sure by the firm, and the province, as I said, has its own assessment process on this. But these kind of projects of this scale need to be dealt with and need to be assessed in a very sober, realistic, and thoughtful way, and that's how we've done it. And now it moves into the hands of the province.
Last question, though. I mean, the government does have some responsibility still here. I mean, it's the government's responsibility as representative of the Crown to negotiate with First Nations and to make sure that works. I mean, the government has to still do some work here. Am I right?
No, quite right, and that's why we have announced a number of projects in order to engage, for example, Aboriginal communities to ensure that they get economic benefit, not just within the context of this one project, but parallel projects and other ones as well, to make sure that they get some skills training, which is why we engaged, again, in outside advice from Doug Eifert, who gave advice to the government on how we can best do that, and we're going through his recommendations. We've implemented many of them, and others we're going to be implementing in the near future. So, again, this is hardly a speedy process to ram through any kind of project. This is about getting it right, because it really is important that we seize the economic benefits of these kinds of projects for the long-term benefit of our economy.
Minister Moore, thanks for your time today. Appreciate it.
All the best.